What's up? So today I wanted to make a video about something that has been absolutely fascinating me this past week. Captured my attention. And if you've been on the internet at any point this week, maybe it has captured yours. The thing I want to talk about is the ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. And personally, I find this story so interesting because we live in such a fast-paced and high-tech world. It seems like something like this wouldn't happen, or that we would know how to fix it quickly. And it was a good reminder that sometimes things just get stuck. So, plus the memes were absolute fire. But I wanted to just dive in. There's a lot to know, a lot to learn. So I want to start with talking about the Suez Canal. So, if you don't know, on March 23rd, a container ship called the Ever Given was traveling through the Suez Canal and got stuck. Just stuck. I don't know how to put it. Maybe I'll put a picture here of it getting stuck. It just got stuck. And so let's talk about the Suez Canal. So the Suez Canal is an 193-kilometer waterway that's pivotal in connecting Europe and Asia. Located in Egypt, the artificial sea level waterway was built between 1859 and 1869, linking the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. As the shortest route between the Atlantic Ocean and the lands around the Indian and Western Pacific Oceans, the canal is one of the busiest waterways in the world, negating the need to navigate around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and cutting voyage times by days and weeks. The Cape of Good Hope in Africa is the southern tip of Africa, and it's pretty dangerous to navigate on a boat. It can be very tumultuous. So not only is it cutting times, like distance-wise, but it's also like safety-wise. So the Suez Canal is the world's longest canal without locks, which connects. So locks are devices that connect water at differing altitudes. So if you've got like a lake up here and an ocean down here, there would be a system of locks between them so that boats can get from the lake to the water. You know what I mean? With no locks to interrupt traffic, the transit time from end to end of the Suez Canal averages about 13 to 15 hours. So, who built the Suez Canal and when? So, there's a really long history of the Suez Canal, and I've gotten this information from a couple different sources. So, if it is a little bit incongruent, that's probably why. But I'll do my best to edit on the fly. So, the first canal in the region is thought to have been dug in about 1850 BCE, when an irrigation channel navigable at flood periods was constructed into Wadi Jumeillat, a dry river valley east of the Nile Delta. Known as the Canal of the Pharaohs, that channel was extended by the Ptolemies via the Bitter Lakes as far as the Red Sea. Extended under the Romans, who called it Trajan's Canal, neglected by the Byzantines, and reopened by the early Arabs, the canal was deliberately filled in 775 Common Era. The reason for those changes appears to have been to facilitate trade from the Delta lands to the Red Sea rather than provide passage to the Mediterranean. So they wanted to keep their trade local, I guess. Venetians in the 15th century and the French in the 17th and 18th centuries speculated upon the possibility of making a canal through the isthmus. A canal there would make it possible for ships of their nations to sail directly from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, and so dispute the monopoly of the East Indian disasters was conceived when Egypt was under the control of the Ottoman Empire in the mid-19th century. Construction began at the Port Said end in early 1859, took 10 years to complete, and required an estimated 1.5 million workers. According to the Suez Canal Authority, the Egyptian government agency that operates the waterway, 20,000 workers were drafted every 10 months to help construct the project with, quote, excruciating and poorly compensated labor. Many died of cholera and other diseases. So you can already see from this early history that the Suez Canal has a really long history of, colonialism and exploitation. Political tumult in Egypt against the colonial powers of Britain and France slowed progress on the canal, and the final cost was roughly double the initial $50 million projected. Although the canal was originally engineered to handle much smaller vessels, its channels have been widened and deepened several times, most recently 6 years ago, at the cost of more than $8 billion. So, what country controls the Suez Canal now? The British powers that controlled the canal through the first two world wars withdrew forces in 1956 after years of negotiations with Egypt, effectively relinquishing authority to the Egyptian government led by President Gamal Abdel Nasser. So, what was the Suez Crisis? The crisis began in 1956 when Egypt's president nationalized the canal, and Britain, along with France and Israel, invaded to reclaim control. But the assault failed when President Dwight D. Eisenhower refused to back the military intervention, a decision that underscored Britain's decline to a second-tier power. So I think this was like early Cold War. The crisis briefly closed the canal and raised the risk of entangling the Soviet Union and the United States. It ended in early 1957 under an agreement supervised by the UN, which sent its first peacekeeping force to the area. The outcome was seen as a triumph for Egyptian nationalism, but its legacy was an undercurrent in the Cold War. Okay, yeah, so Cold War vibes. Has the canal ever been closed? Egypt closed the canal for nearly a decade after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, when the waterway was basically a front line between Israeli and Egyptian military forces. 14 cargo ships, which became known as the Yellow Fleet, were trapped in the canal until it was reopened in 1975 by Mr. Nasser's successor, Anwar al-Sadat. So a few accidental groundings of vessels have closed the canal since then. The most notable, until this past week, was the 3-day shutdown in 2004 when a Russian oil tanker ran aground. Alright, let's dive in. So, last week, the Suez Canal, one of the world's busiest trade routes, was blocked for 6 days after the accidental grounding of Ever Given, a Golden-class container ship. The company said that the 1,300-foot vessel had been buffeted on March 23rd by strong winds, reaching 46 miles per hour, knocking it off course. Egyptian authorities subsequently stated that there may have been technical or human error involved as well. The ship ran aground on one of requires the container area of vessels to act like a sail and thus affect the course of the ship. The momentum of heavy ship, such as Ever Given, is difficult to counteract if blown off course. The government of Egypt requires ships traversing the canal to be boarded by an Egyptian Suez crew, including one or more official maritime pilots from Egypt's Suez Canal Authority, who command the ship, taking over from the regular crew. There were 2 Egyptian Suez Canal Authority pilots on board at the time of the accident. So, this is a pretty common thing for big boats, especially like container ships, to have pilots for various regions that are hard to traverse. So it's not just in the Suez Canal, but for example, the Columbia River, which runs between Oregon and Washington, the delta of the river where it connects to the ocean is pretty dangerous, but a lot of container ships have to transit it. And so there are pilots that will get on the ship. They'll take a little boat out to the ship and then like get on the ship and help it navigate the currents and the different depths. And so these pilots really know intimately the bathymetry, which means like the topography basically. And they also know the currents and just like have done it a lot, so they're experienced. So these Suez pilots know what's up. So according to an analysis of data from ship tracking websites, the bank effect, which may cause the stern of a ship to swing towards the near bank when operating in constricted waterways, may have contributed to the grounding, along with lateral forces of the windstorm pushing sideways against the ship. Since most of the focus of modern ship design is directed towards efficiency and stability at sea, the effects of hydrodynamics in shallow waters, especially in light of the rapidly growing size of ships, remain obscure and have kind of been neglected. Officials initially planned to move 2 vessels from behind the Ever Given to make room for the refloating operation. Fuel and 9,000 tons of ballast water were removed from the ship to help lighten it, as heavy machinery, including an excavator, worked to dig the bow out. By March 25th, 8 tugboats were assisting the attempt to pull it free. Peter Brodowski, chief executive of the Dutch company Royal Boskalis Westminster, stated on March 25th that such an operation can take days to weeks. Addressing a press conference, Osama Rabi, Suez Canal Authority chairman, said that weather conditions were, quote, not the main reasons for the ship's grounding, adding that, quote, there may have been technical or human error, and that all factors would be looked into in the investigation of the incident. On March 28th, efforts to dislodge the ship allowed for some movement of the ship's stern and its rudder at high tide, and Suez Canal Authority Chairman Rabi said that water had been running under the ship again, and that, quote, at any time the ship could slide and move from the spot it is in. Additionally noting he hoped it would not be necessary to remove some of the 18,300 containers on board the ship, despite strong tides and winds complicating recovery efforts. This came as the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi ordered preliminary preparations to be made for lightening the ship's cargo. On March 29th, Ever Given was refloated near the king tide of a supermoon. It took 14 tugboats at high tide to dislodge the 224,000-ton vessel. So, you heard that right. When they thought all was lost, the moon came through. That supermoon, I don't know if you saw it, it was very beautiful. But she was like, hold my beer, and floated the Ever Given. I'm obsessed. The vessel was finally freed and moving again as of 3:05 p.m. local time, and was towed to the Great Bitter Lake for inspection. By the time traffic through the Suez Canal resumed, more than 400 ships were waiting, approximately 200 in the Red Sea, under 200 in the Mediterranean Sea, and around 50 in the Bitter Lakes. Okay, sidebar. If notice that my lighting or my background is changing a little bit, it's because my fridge keeps coming on and then I have to stop and I'll do like work in between. But it's a little bit annoying. Anyway, back to the story of the Ever Given. So, for 6 days, billions of dollars worth of international commerce sat paralyzed at either end of the Suez Canal. The ship's insurers and the canal authorities summoned the largest tugboats in the canal, then 2 even larger ones from further afield. They deployed diggers, front-end loaders, and specialized dredgers to guzzle sand and mud from where the ship was lodged at both ends. They called in 8 of the world's most respected salvage experts from the Netherlands. Day and night, with international pressure bearing down, the dredgers dredged and the tugboats tugged. But not until the 7th day, after the confluence of the full moon and the sun conjured an unusually high tide, did the ship wriggle free with one last heave shortly after 3 p.m., allowing the first of nearly 400 ships waiting to resume their journeys by Monday evening. How it happened will be the province of teams of inspectors and investigators who were set to begin work after the now unstuck container ship, the Ever Given, motored under its own power Monday evening into the Great Bitter Lake, north of where it had been marooned since running aground amid a sandstorm last Tuesday morning. Because the ship sails under a Panamanian flag, Panama will handle the investigation unless Egypt exercises its right to take over, though international pressure for a more thorough accounting could result in the United States National Transportation Safety Board stepping in. The Egyptians have already reached one conclusion, investigation or no. The Suez Canal is not at fault. Lieutenant General Osama Rabi, the head of the Canal Authority, said in a news conference on Monday night, "We have been harmed by the incident." Early on, the ship's owner and operator blamed the wind, and maritime experts agreed that it had been a factor, perhaps the deciding one, as gusts pushed against the vertical wall of containers piled high atop the Ever Given, as though against a sail. But General Rabi also suggested over the weekend that human or technical error may have come into play. Under standard procedures, 2 Egyptian canal pilots would have boarded the ship before it entered the canal to help it navigate, experts said, though the ship's captain would have retained final authority. A reconstruction of the ship's movements through the narrow section of the canal north of the port of Suez shows the Ever Given weaving back and forth from one side of the canal to another, almost as soon as it entered the channel, gathering speed until the 224,000-ton ship tops 13 knots or about 15 miles per hour. Well, it's not yet known what caused the Ever Given to start bouncing around the waterway. Once it did, it succumbed to what is known in seafaring as the bank effect. That is a phenomenon in which the stern of the ship tends to swing towards one bank while its bow is pushed away from it, said Captain Paul Foran, a maritime consultant who, as a ship's captain, navigated the Suez Canal 18 times. Captain Foran said that whoever was giving orders most likely tried to regain control of the ship by putting on speed. But that decision would have made matters worse, robbing the crew of its usual maneuvering tools. Bow thrusters that could push the bow left or right stop working at high speeds. The faster the ship goes, the lower the pressure beneath the hull, sinking the vessel dangerously low in the water. The faster you go, the less control you have, he said, and on a ship that size, once she gets out of control like that, it gets even more difficult to bring her under control. Investigators will also use audio from the ship's voice recorder and tracking data to piece together what combination of commands and by whom spelled ruin. But the result was clear. A ship the length of 4 football fields, the length of the Empire State Building, wedged diagonally across a vital canal much narrower than 4 football fields at a time when global shipping could ill afford further disruption after a year of havoc brought on by the pandemic. So, the Ever Given got freed by the moon, freed by the tides, freed by the people who are working to loosen it up. But that's the story. I might throw some memes in just for fun. if you have any deets, if you have any info, if you want to know more, let me know. This has been super fun to learn a lot more about the Ever Given and the Suez Canal, and I hope you enjoyed. So